So first off, everyone always asks, hey, I'm new to Linux. What distributions should I try? And I always say Linux Mint or Pop! OS. So I'm going to go ahead and show you Linux Mint. This runs on what's called a Cinnamon desktop environment, and it is Debian based and also Ubuntu based. But basically, what I'm saying is when I say Cinnamon or XFCE or any of these desktop environments, that's kind of like the look and feel and the menu system that is in the operating system. And then when I say Debian based, usually that means what package manager comes with it. To break down that statement, which many Linux people have done in the past, and I've said many times, hey, I'm on a Debian system or a Debian based system. That means the package manager is going to be apt. And if you see any instructions online where it says sudo apt install and then the package or program you want, it means those instructions are meant for a Debian-based system. Now, what distributions are in Debian? Almost all of a good large majority of them are in Debian, but really the ones that most people recognize are Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Pop! OS, and there's a whole bunch of different spins of all these things, meaning different versions of the same distribution with just a couple things tweaked or changed. And really, those are the ones I want you to know about. So everything comes from the granddaddy, the father, the Debian is where everything comes from. That's why I love Debian, because, well, if everyone's making distributions on Debian, obviously it is rock solid. It's made very well. You never have to worry about really bad updates or anything crazy happening. A lot of people are contributing to the Debian project, and that's pretty awesome. And then the next one in the Debian-based system that everyone knows is Ubuntu, which I'm not going to showcase in this video because I don't really like them. They're run by Canonical, and I've done a whole video on that, and I said, hey, they're the devil, which is a little harsh. But I just wanted to get my point across of why I don't like Ubuntu and why I don't recommend it for pretty much anybody. And then you have Ubuntu-based distributions, which are in turn Debian-based distributions. They just have some extra features that Ubuntu has added, such as PPAs. I wanted to explain that real fast because apt is a package manager, and how it installs programs is from what's called repositories. And those repositories download your programs. But sometimes you needed a repository for an offshoot program that just is, kind of hard. And to add it directly through Debian, it can be a little cumbersome. However, Ubuntu and the Canonical team made something called PPAs, where it makes it a little easier to add a repository and install more programs. Now, if you're running Debian, you can't use PPAs. And if you do, you're going to probably break your installation. But as far as Pop! OS and Linux Mint, you can use both Debian-based in repositories and also the Ubuntu PPAs, so it kind of get the best of both worlds. And also Mint and Pop! OS out of the box come with a lot more system options configured, so you don't have to do as much configuration when installing a distribution. Now, having said all that, no distribution's perfect. There is no silver bullet. There is no distribution you're going to just install and go, whoa, this is awesome. It has everything I need. Everything works exactly how I want it to work. Yeah, that doesn't exist. So many Windows users coming over chase that, and it just doesn't exist. Remember this. If you take anything away from this video, you need to customize whatever distribution you install to fit your needs. So all a distribution is a starting place, hence why I've always said distribution doesn't matter, because I want to reinforce that point. So if you take nothing from this video, remember that. So as far as Linux Mint goes, here's a screenshot. This runs by default the Cinnamon desktop environment. So it has all the package managers of both Debian and then also the PPAs from Ubuntu, like I said, to install your programs. But how it looks and feels is the Cinnamon desktop environment, and the Linux Mint team, I recommend it because a lot of Windows users really like where everything's at. It's a more familiar to them and not as foreign as, let's say, a different desktop environment, which we're going to get into. And let's switch over to Pop! OS. Now, Pop! OS is a lot like Linux Mint in the background, uses the same package managers. However, by default, it comes with GNOME, or how many Linux vets would call it, GNOME. So that's why you see the different pronunciations in videos. But this desktop environment, I don't particularly care for just because it's so foreign. I don't like its workflow, but it may suit you. So you need to try these out and kind of see how it is. Now, I personally like Pop! OS a little bit more than Linux Mint just because the system settings out of the box are very good. Now, when I say system settings, I'm talking about like gaming settings, like graphics drivers and things like that. If you have an NVIDIA proprietary card, a lot of people have issues with NVIDIA on Linux Mint because of how they design their drivers, which again, I've made videos about that. So if that applies to you, definitely check those out. But you should know out of the gate, Pop! OS is more optimized for gaming because it has what's called eSync. And then it also has some of the caching and things like that already optimized in the system settings. So you don't have to touch them just out of the gate. They're ready to go. They also include a lot of proprietary drivers that many other Linux distributions do not actually give you. So watching movies and things like that, you've probably heard some people say, well, Linux can't play movies and this type of thing. They can, they just require you to install these proprietary drivers. And out of the gate, Linux Mint and also Pop! OS do a very good job of adding these, so it's very easy. So if you're from Windows coming to Linux, I always recommend these two distributions just to get your feet wet so you have a better understanding of Linux as a whole. Now, this whole branch, everything I've talked about in this video up to this point is about Debian or Debian-based distributions. Now, I'm only going to touch 3 of the trees in the actual huge distribution map because really those are the 3 trees you need to focus on and understand before you do anything else with any other distributions. There's going to be people in the comment section saying, install Gentoo, do Void Linux, do OpenSUSE, do all these other ones. And I'm saying, forget all that. You need to learn these 3 branches before you do anything else with any other distribution, because if you can't grasp these distributions, then there's no point in trying the other ones. So now that I've explained Debian-based distributions, and really if you're a Windows user, again, Linux Mint or Pop! OS, but my favorite one out of this branch is Debian, because it's the granddaddy. It's the one that everything's based on. So when you see, hey, my production machine is using Debian, that's my personal choice. That's what I like to use for actually editing and rendering the video you're watching right now. So moving on, let's go ahead and go down to more of the business realm. You've probably heard of the company Red Hat. Red Hat makes what's called Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Many people in the Linux circles refer to this as RHEL. And it also has a subscription-based model. It's meant for enterprise. Most people won't ever install a RHEL-based system. However, if you're installing a server and you want that system or want to tinker around or learn it, let's say you're an aspiring Linux system admin, you're probably going to be working with CentOS because it's completely free out of the box, has everything that RHEL has, and it just kind of mirrors the Red Hat Enterprise Linux branch. So very good to know. And you might be asking, well, if they're the same, why would you choose RHEL and pay money for it? And the reason for that is simply it has support. You can call up a person, they'll walk you through it. And in a business environment, that's pretty crucial, especially when time is money. But as far as desktop environments, Red Hat basically has a test bed or a desktop environment it spins up, and it's called Fedora. Fedora is great because it's all based on that stability and reliability of Red Hat, and it is a fantastic operating system. I run it on my laptop and have run it on my laptop for years now. And basically this was an old laptop that I needed to repurpose, and I think it has Fedora 28 on it. So it's like several revisions behind it. I just hadn't bothered updating it because usually it's used for schoolwork and other things by the kids. And I just don't see a need to really upgrade it. And when it comes to Red Hat, everything's just so darn stable and reliable. It's the most reliable and stable of all systems. However, it can run a little bit behind the times. Now, Fedora itself is pretty good with its packages. Like I said, this is where Red Hat kind of tests everything out. So as a desktop user, you get a lot of the up-to-date packages that you come to expect out of, Debian-based systems. So there's not too much different, but the package manager is drastically different. By default, Fedora comes with GNOME like Pop! OS does. So you can change that out to different desktop environments if GNOME isn't your thing. And also, the package manager is usually Yum or DNF. And this was where you see instructions online that say, hey, sudo yum install or sudo DNF install to install certain packages. This is the package manager this branch uses. So Red Hat branch, usually most people are using Fedora out of this, but there's other obscure distributions. I'm only going to talk about Fedora in this video. And that's kind of its thing. So I use this on my laptop. I really enjoy this distribution just because it's so stable and reliable. And then the third desktop environment, and this one I really love, but it has such a bad stigma around it. So many bad things from people getting elitist attitudes and other things like that come from this specific branch of distributions, and they're Arch-based distributions or Arch Linux distributions. Now, you've probably seen shirts and people say, hey, by the way, I use Arch. It mainly comes from its install process of the vanilla Arch distribution is a little more cumbersome. It's a little more difficult. It mainly uses all command line. And that's difficult, especially for new users. So that's where that whole elitist attitude or whatnot comes from. But as it's become more and more popular and more people have used it, it's kind of a joke now. Nobody really thinks, oh, Arch is really that difficult. Many people will use like Acro Linux or Manjaro Linux and just get it installed with a GUI. It's, just a different distribution based on Arch, but at the end of the day, they're pretty much the same thing. They have their own differences on these sub distributions like Manjaro or Acro Linux. But at the end of the day, they're pretty much the same. Manjaro runs a little bit more behind the official Arch repositories just because they like to test out their things a little more. And some people say it's more stable. I'm not one of those people. I think, honestly, Manjaro is not as stable as vanilla Arch because, again, I'm more of a purist. I like to actually get what all these other distributions are based on. I like to get the granddaddy or the thing that is used the most, but it's usually extremely user-friendly. Like Debian, super user-friendly. That's why I never recommend a new user use it. Arch, again, vanilla Arch is not user-friendly, not something I'd recommend a new user to use. If you're a new user and you want to try an Arch-based system, I always recommend usually Manjaro. And if you're like, hey, I don't like Manjaro, Acro Linux would probably be my next choice. But that is the Arch-based distributions, and how Arch works is it has its package manager, which is called Pac-Man, kind of like the old school video game. And it has a little bit of a weird syntax, but I've grown to like it. It's completely fine. And then they also have something called the AUR. Now, this is extremely powerful because it builds programs for you. Sometimes your program's not going to be in a repository and you want to build it from source. You've probably heard this term. And what the AUR does is it basically takes an instruction set or a script and builds the whole thing for you and installs it on your system. So it becomes a one-line command like installing from a repository. And that's super powerful. It's extremely awesome. I absolutely love Arch Linux specifically for this because it's such a time saver. So that's Arch Linux. I'm going to show a bunch of screenshots real fast. Here is kind of what people think of when you say Arch Linux. Kind of a joke, right? Well, this is a joke. That's not what Arch Linux looks like. What it really looks like is something like this. You can constantly kind of flip through these and go to the Unix porn subreddit and actually kind of look at all these. Now, just because porn's in the title doesn't mean that it's got any naked girls or anything like that on there. This is mainly, and I'll scroll through this real fast, this is mainly all the different types of configurations you can do between Debian base, Arch base, all the distributions out there. This is just how versatile Linux looks. It is amazing how you can make it look and feel like anything. You want it to make it look and feel like Windows 98? Here you go. It doesn't matter. You can do that. That's how powerful Linux is. That's why I'm always so pumped up about it. But it's a hard thing to explain. It's extremely complex subject matter, and trying to break it down so everyone can absorb it and use it is something that's difficult because there's so many technical minds in the space. There's just not very many good marketing minds or people to actually go in and break it down so every person can digest this information. So I'm going to keep making these videos because that's kind of what I'm aiming for. And albeit I am more of a technical mindset than a marketing mindset. I'm just not very good on the marketing front, but it's something that I am cognizant of and something that I work to achieve with this video. And I'm going to make more of this video just so you understand more of the distributions. And when it comes to Arch Linux here that we just covered, I use this on my studio PC now because I like to have a little bit of everything. And if I'm going to tell you distribution doesn't matter, it's just a starting point, I want to showcase that in my videos. I want to showcase that in my life. I want to practice what I preach, and that's why I run all these different branches of distributions and package managers, because I think it's important to stay up to date on all of it and kind of be able to inform you which one might suit you. So let's break down the type of person which would use what. I already told you that my actual production machine is running vanilla Debian. This is very good. It's very stable. I've been running it for over 6 months now and have never had a crash. I've never had it randomly reboot. I've never had it update on me. I've never had it do anything other than what I needed it to do. So very stable. However, the setup process was a bit of a nightmare. If you look at my live streams that I have on recording, it was like 5 hours of live streaming, the actual setup process, which I had a bad USB drive. I had pretty much everything bad that you can happen during a Linux install happen during that time. And while it might be humorous, I wouldn't recommend watching that video for installation purposes. I did go back and make an install video, Debian Buster install video, which I will link up here in the card, just so you can actually install Debian if you want to go down that path. Just know there's a lot of system settings you need to change to like do gaming and other things that it's not for your new user. But if you're experienced and you want to start branching into the Debian one, I highly recommend you do that. And this is where I'd start. Now, having said that, there's also the rel-based branch. And I already said this is the most stable and reliable, and that's because it's built for security and reliability. That's it. It usually has a little bit more older repositories and a little more stable as far as the system itself. I don't really have any problems. That laptop that's been running, that Fedora, has been running it for 2.5 years or something, and I don't really even touch it. I just let the kids go to town on it for schooling and other things, and I never have had to worry about anything happening to it because it just works. Occasionally they'll be like, hey, I need to install something new. I think the last program I installed on it was VLC to play some movies through its DVD player on my laptop. That I think that laptop's actually 12 years old. So just to give you an idea of how awesome Fedora is as far as stability and reliability, it's pretty awesome. And then you have Arch Linux, which is really meant for the person that needs the most bleeding edge. Like if you're looking for a package that just got released last week, Arch is going to be your game. I mean, that's going to be your spot. It's not that reliable, though. I will say it takes a mindset. When you start installing a whole bunch of stuff through the AUR, or you're constantly updating just blindly every day, it's probably going to break on you. I'm not going to lie. It's something that if I'm running Arch Linux, I'm doing backups using TimeShift, which I've done a video on that will be able to revert back. Let's say you have a bad update or you install a bad program that happens to crash your system because it installed something it probably shouldn't have when it comes to an old repository or a dependency that conflicts with something else in the system, and it might crash your system. That's why I would use TimeShift if you're really installing a bunch of stuff in an Arch Linux. That sounds really scary, but it's really not. Just be checking to see, hey, is this an updated package if you're installing from the AUR? But if you're just using Pacman, it's pretty darn stable in that regard. If you're just sticking to its package manager and not using the AUR, it's really stable. So it just depends on the user. But if I want everything bleeding edge, I want everything to be the absolute newest thing that's out, I'm going to be using an Arch-based system. So a lot of people that don't have a a real heavy technical skill set don't like using vanilla Arch, and I totally understand that because the install process isn't the greatest. I've made an install video about using like a script to help guide you along. However, I understand that's not for everybody. So that's why I'd recommend like a Manjaro Linux that has a really polished launcher. Their team has done a very good job. Just know they do a little more vetting on a lot of their updates. So it can be okay. But if you blindly update through the graphic user interface, I have had Manjaro break on me. So at the end of the day, I'd break it down into these 3 categories that you need to learn before branching off and trying any other distributions. Learn your Debian-based distributions, learn your RHEL-based distribution, which is really Fedora, and then learn your Arch-based distributions, which would be pretty much vanilla Arch, and Manjaro would be my main recommendations for starting out. And once you learn these, Debian is the most popular. So all the guides and help guides out there are typically Debian based. And then a lot of people move to an Arch based system because they want the newest packages out. They want to see the newest hotness as soon as it's released. And that's where Arch comes in handy. You get the latest kernels, you get the latest packages through their repositories. Everything's just really, really nice and bleeding edge. But at the same time, there is some growing pains with that if you just upgrade all willy-nilly. That's just a quick breakdown of all the distributions. I absolutely love all these. There's not any distribution that I consider bad. I just like to refrain from stepping down too much into the distribution tree and seeing all the different kinds of distributions and going too far in. A lot of people are like, why didn't you try this distribution or this distribution? And I'm like, man, it's a spin of a spin of a spin, meaning instead of Debian based, it becomes Ubuntu based. And then instead of Ubuntu based, it becomes like a spin of Pop OS, which by using this tree, you can see that Pop OS is based on Ubuntu and Ubuntu is based on Debian. And you can kind of see how this can be a little cumbersome and why I don't do any of these other little tiny distributions that I just don't think they make much of a splash at all. And there's some outliers that I didn't talk about in this video, like Solus, which is not based on any distribution. It's its own kernel build. It's everything in its own right. You have Clear Linux, which is based on Intel. Intel also didn't base this on anything else. It has its own package manager. You have Void Linux, you have Gentoo, you have a whole bunch of other distributions, but these are more for advanced users, nothing that I would recommend anybody new trying. I want you to understand these big 3 before doing anything. So remember Debian, remember Fedora, remember Arch, because these are the 3 that everyone usually falls into and a lot of people actually run as their daily driver, and then there's all these other distributions around it. Understand these 3, understand how the package manager works, understanding how the desktop environments work and how things look in Linux and how many things you can change. That is really what is key in learning. So I'm gonna end the video here, but a big shout out to my patrons. Without you, I couldn't do videos like this one, and I'll see you in the next one.